Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.
All right, welcome back to another edition of Bible Answers Unfiltered. I am your host, Dr. Al Garza. So today I'm going to be making a video in response to a number of videos that were made by Unitarian on YouTube. And so a lot of people sent me some clips or links of these videos. So I went through them and started to watch some of them. And so this Unitarian is basically, his name is Dustin Smith. And it says he has a PhD and is a New Testament scholar at Spartanburg Methodist College, I think South Carolina. And so basically, he's made a number of videos that I've watched a few of them on, trying to refute the Trinity. And so there are a lot of things that are very wrong with these videos. This person, whether he's educated or by where or what degree, I don't know. I don't know well he knows the Hebrew or the Greek or any of that. But I can tell by the way he makes his videos, he's very ignorant of how the scriptures read in context. He either deliberately lies or is deliberately misleading people by leaving out a lot of context or a lot of information, or he's just that ignorant and uneducated in that area that he's trying to speak on regarding the Trinity in some of these passages. He's made a video on Psalm 110:1, which was terrible. This person completely ignored everything behind the Hebrew of Psalm 110:1. He tried to make a video on Genesis 18 on the Trinity, speaking against it, which again failed in his attempt of not giving the complete context or the Hebrew. All he did was read a couple of lines, skip down to a number of the verses, and hop around and give his opinion and completely eisegete the passage, the whole chapter. He relies on non-Jewish, or unbelieving Jews as far as non-believers. He relies on their commentaries or their explanation for his. So if they have a specific interpretation, he kind of uses it, even though they reject the New Testament, they reject Jesus, and he tries to apply that into the text using eisegesis. So he'll say that Trinitarians do eisegesis, but he doesn't deal with any of the substance of the text. It's pretty sad because it seems like he's really deceiving and deliberately lying in order to make his point. And I would dare challenge him to a discussion or debate on Genesis 18 or Psalm 110:1, because he is completely ignorant and does not know what he's talking about. I wouldn't say he's not educated, because he seems to be educated. So my only conclusion is he's deliberately lying and deceiving in the fact of leaving out a lot of the context. He talks about a video about the plural of majesty, and he's dealing with the words of Elohim, and he's calling these plural of majesty type text. But he's completely ignoring the fact that no Trinitarian doesn't disagree with how Elohim can be used for God or people or so forth. That's not even the debate. But he won't dare discuss how the verbs and adjectives are plural numerous times for God himself, and even God himself uses those same verbs in the plural form to describe his presence or his faces in the plural form. And there's no such thing as a royal we or majestic plural with the verbs or adjectives in ancient biblical times or in Semitic languages. These ideas come in late 13th, 14th century European interpretations made up by kings about royalty, when they would say, the kings would use a royal we, you are in our presence, we, regarding, even though he's singular, he's using it that way. So the unbelieving Jews adapted that concept, and even some German liberal scholars adopted it as well and put it in lexicons, even though it didn't exist prior to the 13th century, as far as the plural verbs and adjectives in Semitic languages or in biblical times. And this person, Dustin Smith, or Dr. Dustin Smith, is trying to avoid that and just talk about the plurals of Adonai or Adonim or Elohim, as if there's any debate on that. And no one debates that. The debate is trying to apply the royal we's to the plural and plural verbs and adjectives in Semitic languages, which does not exist. I don't know any serious scholar who would dare say they do exist, that way in the biblical times or in the Hebrew or anywhere else. So this person is really ignorant of that. Uh, so that's why I say I don't know where he was educated or how he was trained, but he's either deliberately lying and deceiving, or he's really that uneducated to understand those differences. He goes to Psalm 110:1, and he basically tries to use the Adoni argument when in fact he doesn't even dare tell you how those vowel pointings come into play, because Adonai, which is the plural name of God, and Adoni, which is the singular possessive form of the name for my Lord, those in Hebrew are spelled exactly the same. The only way you can distinguish them is when the scribes put those little vowel pointings to either pronounce it as Adoni, which is more of a human term for Lord and Master, like my Lord and my Master, or Adonai, which is the plural form of Adon, for possessive plural, which means my lords. And that's a divine title only given to God and God alone. So he doesn't tell you that. He doesn't tell you why the scribe who put those little dashes and dots in the 9th and 10th century, almost 1,000 years after the New Testament, he doesn't tell you why they put it there in the book of Psalms. And that's because they believed that was speaking of either Abraham or David. That's the earliest Jewish interpretation for the passage of Psalm 110:1. They did not believe it was messianic, because a lot of Christians in the early first few centuries before were actually using that verse against them. So they basically interpreted it as being Abraham or David. So that's why they put Adoni. It wasn't a messianic text to them to avoid debating Christians on it. But if you take away those little points or those little dashes, you can say Adonai, to Adonai, that the Lord said to Adonai. Now the Greek Septuagint actually makes both the divine tetragrammaton and the Adonai or Adoni, if you want to say either one, in a sacred name formation, which is the two letters of the Greek words, first and last letter, to make it tell you that this is a sacred name. So it's either, the Lord said to the Lord, both the tetragrammaton on both ends, or Adonai, not Adoni. You will not find in the Septuagint Adoni used as a sacred name. Now, that's important because the early Christian church believed that it was either Adonai or the Tetragrammaton. In fact, a Syriac church father, issued out of Merv, in his commentary on Matthew, stated that the Jews changed the Tetragrammaton in Psalm 110:1 and changed it to Adonai. So it was actually Yehovah said to Yehovah, or if you want to say Yahweh said to Yahweh, or Jehovah said to Jehovah, and they changed it to Adonai. And then, of course, the scribes also changed the vowel pointing to make it Adoni. So we have early church Syriac father attesting to it. We have the Greek, even in the Aramaic. It was a divine title. Now we do have a believing or messianic Jewish scribe. I believe we can say a messianic Jewish scribe who copied the book of Psalms. And when he came to Psalm 110:1, he understood it to be Adonai. In fact, he puts Adonai there. And we have a copy of that. I put it in my other videos. I believe I even have a copy here next to me of this. And this is the scribe who copied Psalm. And this page I printed out. It's the whole book of Psalms. But here in Psalm 110:1, he actually put uh, La Adonai. He put to Adonai, that the Lord Yehovah, as he puts the vowel pointings, Yehovah said to Adonai. So this was a Jewish scribe who decided to understand the text as it was originally meant from the Greek, from the early church Syriac father. So the scribe, who most likely was a believer in Jesus or Yeshua, understood it as Adonai. This Unitarian wants to adapt the non-believing Jewish understanding or interpretation. That's fine. They don't believe in Jesus. They don't believe in the New Testament. They believe it was Abraham or David, not the Messiah. So you want to pick it up and say Adoni, go right ahead, because you are in their camp. And so it is not proof that that Jesus is not divine or God in that text. Because when Jesus references it from the Hebrew and the Greek, it's Adonai. It's in the sacred name abbreviation, In the Aramaic, it's used that way. So I'm not sure why this person deceives and lies about this, because there's a whole background to that word and how the Jews, uh, put it for Adoni for a reason. In fact, I wrote, when I did my second master's in biblical studies, my focus, or my second master's is in biblical studies. It was emphasizing, or the majoring in biblical exegesis, hermeneutics, and textual criticism. That's what I did for that time for my second master's, and I wrote my master's thesis under supervision on Psalm 110:1, which you can find in academia, showing with all the evidence that I just mentioned and more of the early church fathers and how they understood it, how the Jews understood it, why they put Adoni on there, why it's not Adoni, all the evidence I put in my master's thesis. And this person fails to actually understand the historical background of that word. So he focuses on Adoni, which is, again, the unbelieving Jews' interpretation of Abraham or David. So if he wants to believe that, that's fine. If you reject their commentary that it was Abraham or David, then you cannot use Adoni. It's going to be Adonai. And so this person, again, to me, is deliberately lying about the text, or I don't want to say he's uneducated about it, but the only other answer I can give you, or conclusion, is that he's deliberately lying about it. He does the same thing in Genesis 18, where where the Lord appears to Abraham, and Abraham looks up and sees three men. Now, this person, again, wants to tell you that this is probably the Lord and two messengers, because he concludes by skipping down to chapter 19 when the men go down to see Lot. He ignores all of the context in here, specifically the Hebrew, where the Lord appeared, or is appearing to Abraham, because the Hebrew says he is appearing to Abraham. And Abraham looks up and sees three men, and he goes to greet them. And the verbal form is plural. He goes to greet them, and he bows down and says, Adonai, my lords. The plural name of God. He prostrates himself to these three men. And again, these three men, of course, is Shelosha Anashim, three men. It's not the Lord and two angels, or three angels, or three messengers. The Lord, it doesn't say that. Moses deliberately tells you that this is the Lord appearing as three men. That's how it reads in Hebrew. If you want to add two messengers and the Lord, or two angels and the Lord, or three angels, like most Jewish commentaries, or even some Christian commentaries, then you're eisegeting the passage. You're committing eisegesis, period, because it doesn't say that. If you want to truly exegete the passage and read it in its plain, simple form, the Lord appears to Abraham, or is appearing to him. Abraham looks up, sees three men, goes to bow and greet them. He greets them with the plural name of God. Plural form, possessive plural form for Adon, my lords, plural. That's how it's read in Hebrew. That's how it's understood in its simple meaning. And then they speak as one. In verse 5, they said. And then in verse 9, they said. So this is why I believe this person is being very disingenuous, because they speak as one, and he doesn't even address that. He skips all the way down to when the men leave. So you have the plural appearance of God, and even Benjamin Sommer, who is a well-known, he's not a Christian, but he's a well-known Hebrew scholar in Jewish studies and all that. He even says Genesis 18 is perfectly well could be interpreted as God appearing as three men. That's perfectly a Christian's have. It's in his book, The Bodies of God. He has no problem with that. He believes more of an avatar appearance or fluidity, that God appears that way, but he has a different interpretation. Of course, Trinitarians say this is the three, because you have the Lord, the Word, and the Messenger. You have three that appeared just before that. And that's three that appear before the three men appear. And they're called Adonai, and they speak as one. And then the Lord asks a question, and then the Lord answers his own question that he asks to himself. No, he's asking as a three, and then it says the men left. This person tries to say that the three men leave, or I think he numbers them. It doesn't in the text. It doesn't say that. It just says the men leave, and then one stays behind. Obviously, the Lord, and then the Lot sees two messengers or two angels, but they're messengers. But Lot also bows down before the messengers and says, Adoni, the same divine plural form of God's name, my lords, as Abraham did. And they're called Adonai again in verse 18 of chapter 19 by Lot. Again, Lot refers to them as Adonai, my lords, the divine name of God in plural form, possessive plural form. Before you get to verse 24, where it becomes Yahweh rains fire and brimstone from Yahweh out of heaven, which is not two Yahwehs, it's still the three as Yehovah, or Yahweh, if you want to pronounce it that way. So the context leads up to that until you get to chapter 20, where Abraham is defending himself about why he lied about Sarah, and he tells him Abimelech that Elohim, plural, they caused me to leave from my father's house. They did, plural. The first time that Elohim is spoken by an individual with the verb is by Abraham, and he uses it as a plural verb to modify Elohim to its plural form. They caused me. He didn't. It's the first time. And in Genesis 18, when Abraham bows down and says Adonai, that's the first time that Adonai appears without the tetragrammaton, without the Yod He Vav He, without the name. Before that, they were connected. That's the first time that Adonai appears alone, and it's with another plural verb as my lords to the three men. And it's used that way. So if you do some serious exegesis into the text, proper hermeneutics, look at the Hebrew, understand what it's trying to say, you will not come out to a Unitarian position. It is impossible. The Old Testament is clear of the three. In fact, even Benjamin Summer talks about how the messenger is God appearing as the messenger of Yehovah. So when you see the messenger of Yod He Vav He, that means that is God. In fact, the messenger says, I am God in Genesis. And he talks to Jacob, who made a vow to him earlier at Bethel. And it's the messenger that says, you did it to me. I am God. The word Yod He Vav He is God. Elijah met all three. In fact, Elijah had a discussion with the word and the Lord separately about the same conversation in 1 Kings 19. And the messenger fed him. The messenger of Yehovah fed him, and then the word spoke to him, and then the word said, go stand before the Lord as the Lord was passing by. There is a clear distinction between all three. This is the Trinity. Whether you like it or not, that's how it reads. And there are many verses in the Old Testament that even give just this clear distinction before you get to John 1:1, when that same word becomes flesh. He was next to God, with God, was God, and became flesh. Jesus himself affirms that he came down from heaven, that he's greater than the temple, he's Lord of the Sabbath. He was with the Father from the beginning of all creation. Paul gives you the same description in Philippians, that he was existing in the very form and nature of God. And the Hebrew is just as strong, repeating the past, pre-existence, pre-existing as God, in the form of God. This is the word. This is what you find throughout the New Testament. He's called Ha'adon, the Lord. In the Greek, you have the definite article there. It's the Lord. The Lord is only applied to God himself in the Old Testament a number of times, and that is who Jesus is referred to as. He's referred to as the Lord by the apostles, by the women who after his resurrection, by Paul, by the epistles. This is what is ignored by every single Unitarian. Again, they focus on the human side and they ignore it, or they try to eisegete all the passages that are simply understood and read that Jesus is the Lord, he's God, he's Yehovah, all the way through from the Old Testament as the word. This is what you can't get away with. So this person butchers the Hebrew, butchers the context, lies about what the context is, and manipulates it, and doesn't give all the information just so he can try and prove so-called Unitarianism. And one of the websites I looked at under him, he talks about how the word Trinity isn't in the Bible, but it doesn't mean that it can't be there. The word Unitarian doesn't exist in the Bible either. You're not going to find the word Unitarian or God is one person. Then they say, where does it say Jesus says, I am God? Where does Jesus say, I am not God? Literally, where does Jesus say, I am not God? He never says it. This is why these arguments fail, because you have to look at the text for what it is and put it all together, not just look at one way of the human Jesus, but I'm going to ignore all the other passages that talk about his deity and divinity, his preexistence, and I'm going to try to do eisegesis and try to reinterpret all these passages so they don't fit. And then he makes a video which irritates me about the wisdom of incarnation. The wisdom, he tries to equate the wisdom with the word. This parallel is so far fetched to try and make wisdom the same as explaining John 1:1 or anything else. It is completely absurd to take wisdom, which is feminine, into the text of Proverbs or Psalms and try to utilize that to explain the word that's the same thing. And it's not, when you have the word all throughout the book of Genesis, speaking to Abraham, speaking to Elijah, coming and speaking, identified as God, all of these things, wisdom is never utilized that way. Never. No matter hard this person wants to try, it doesn't exist in the same category. It's in a completely different genre in itself of explanation. The word is the Lord himself who appears and speaks. He's a distinct person, as we saw with Elijah in 1 Kings 19. And he's that way all throughout till you get to John 1:1 when he was with God and was God. He was next to God, as the Hebrew says. This person does not know either. He's very illiterate in biblical understanding of what the text is trying to say, or he's literally lying and deceiving the people. So I have to go with the fact that this person is probably deliberately deceiving and lying, the fact that he's leaving out so much because he knows that if he addresses these, they don't help him. They actually refute him with the whole royal we's or the plural verbs and adjectives that he doesn't discuss, talking about wisdom with the word, or trying to reinterpret Genesis 18 to fit a more much later rabbinic or Jewish explanation, or even certain Christians who adapted the Lord and two angels theory, which early church fathers never accepted. This person seriously needs to go back and re-educate himself in the Hebrew and in the languages. So, but again, these are some of the things I wanted to address and get out there, because this is getting really ridiculous on some of the things he's putting out there, and no one's really challenging him on it, and it needs to be addressed because he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what the text says in the Hebrew Old Testament, and he definitely is not familiar with the New Testament, how it's used properly without doing eisegesis and butchering the text. Nowhere does it say God is one single person, just like you can say, well, where does it say that God is a Trinity? Where does it say God's a Unitarian? Doesn't say those words are foreign to the text, but we understand the interpretation of meanings into the text, like the word, how God appears, and there's no problem with that. Just like Jesus never said, I'm not God, he's not going to say, I am God, and so everybody can understand him, but his actions, words, and deeds, and what the text says until we get to after the resurrection is affirmed that he did pre-exist as the Word, became flesh. He came down from heaven. He was with the Father from creation, and all things were created by him, for him, and through him. You cannot be a human being and make those types of statements. It's impossible, because you either had to exist, as he says, as the text says, plain and simple. And this is not wisdom literature. This is completely erroneous to say this is wisdom type language. It's really, I want to say, it's really dumb to make that assertion when he says he's with God. He was God, and he became flesh, and he tabernacled. It's prophesied in the Old Testament, utilized by Genesis 8, Genesis 15, all the way through Elijah and so forth. It is completely disturbing to see how they butcher these texts and try to make them, literally try to make up eisegesis into the text so they can fit their Unitarian view. But oh well. But yeah, I have no problem. This person, I would dare challenge him on a discussion or debate on Genesis 18 or Psalm 110:1. This person will not, even come close to refuting anything I've stated, because you can't. It's solid in the Hebrew, the grammar, the syntax, the culture, the context. It's all there. Even like I said, there are great Trinitarian scholars and even non-Trinitarian scholars who even admit to these passages, saying, yes, it appears that way, even with Benjamin Sommer. He agrees with he agrees that the Trinitarian view can be interpreted that way, even though he looks at was more of a different point of view of avatars fluidity. But he has no problem with the Trinitarian interpretation of these passages. So it's only Unitarians who make things up and deliberately deceive. And I've debated Unitarians where they deliberately have lied to me. And I have messages and texts to prove that they've lied. Even after I've exposed them, they still continue to lie. So this is sometimes what you get. They don't want to they don't want to know the truth. They just want to keep believing the lie and pretty much deceiving people. So, but I'll leave it at that. I get very passionate about this because I don't like people deceiving other people like that and leaving out so much, leaving out everything I mentioned about the true understanding behind these verses and context and culture and language. So when I see that, it makes me very upset. So I normally get comments here, and if you're going to comment, if you're a Unitarian, you're going to comment. Okay, I'm going to respond the way you respond to me. So if you're coming at me trying to attack anything I'm saying or say anything that very rudely, then I'm going to respond the same way. Now, if you want to have a discussion about this, that's fine. But you either ask a question or a clarification, and we can have a discussion. But if you're going to come in and start making dumb remarks, then I'm going to respond back to you. Given my background, that's just the way I am. I come from a fighting background, martial art background since I was 6 years old. So I have that mentality of if you're going to come at me, I'm going to come at you right back. I'm not passive. I'm not, that way. That's just not the way God made me, given my training, my background. So, if you don't come at me with concordances or things that I already know about. I've been doing this for over 30 years. Most scholars, pretty much all serious scholars, do not use Strong's Concordance as the way to prove anything because they don't give you the syntax, the grammar, and all that stuff. They just, because you have a root word of something does not mean that it gives you the interpretation. So don't come at me with some Strong's links and all that nonsense. Trust me, no scholar uses it. We know the language. We read directly from the language. We know the grammar, the syntax. We know everything from that perspective, the culture, the context of what's being said here. So if you want to have a discussion, that's fine. Post them, comments. I'll be glad to go over them with anybody. So anyway, I want to say thank you. If you want to help with this channel, you can buy a book. All my books are on Amazon and any online bookstore, Barnes & Noble, Harvard.com, pretty much any online bookstore you can find if you just Google my name. Of course, Amazon's the most common because they do overnight shipping and all that, and they're a lot less than buying at other bookstores. But my books are everywhere online. So if you want, search me out, go to my website, dralgarza.info. I'll leave the links here. Go to my academia page. You can donate to this. We're still working on the Hebrew New Testament projects. It's like I said, we're doing it at a slow pace because we don't have enough funds coming in. We do have some, which is great, but it's not enough to keep it moving at a fast pace. But other than that, if you have any questions or comments, leave them here. Support the ministry, like, share, subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a wonderful day.
Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.